Labor for Entrepreneurship Laboratory. My guest this evening, Francis Moore Lappé. You have done quite a number of books. The Wikipedia says 15, but in fact it's 16 books. And you are a social activist, to put it like that, a social activist, and you got what is called the alternative Nobelpreis for your work, and it's basically, guys, as I understood it, it's on hunger and on how we could manage this small planet in a better way than we do. And before you address the main points and suggestions that you have, the idea was to invite her, and there are so many things to do, there are so many problems that we have to solve. What could be the contribution of entrepreneurs? We are here entrepreneurs, or we think about entrepreneurship. That's our main theme. Some of us have founded a company already, some plan to do that. So we will discuss a little bit, or you may suggest, is there a way that we not only use the politicians and the parties and the non-governmental organizations, but maybe also entrepreneurs? That's a chance, and I think that could be helpful. Anyway, maybe we start with something. What is your ideas, what is your suggestions that you would to give us an idea about and invite us to join?
Good,
thank you for your coming. It's a great honor for us to have a guest like you here with us.
You're very kind. And you will give me a signal when you think I should wrap up. Yes. So, thank you all for being here, and I love your country. I have been having a wonderful time in Germany. I will try to lay out big ideas in a simple way that I think entrepreneurship, as I understand it, is right at the heart of what the world needs. My thesis is that solutions in a most general way to all of the global problems, from hunger, as mentioned, to global heating. I refer to it as global heating, not global warming, because I think global warming sounds too benign. But I think that the solutions are generally known. What is missing, and the real obstacle, and the only thing we really have to worry about, is people's feeling powerless to actually manifest what we know. So, to begin, I would say that the role of the entrepreneur is to enable and to help people feel the power that they have. That is the key art that is needed today. And so I would like to just briefly explain where I began. And I was very influenced in my life journey by one of your countrymen, Erich Fromm. Do you know his work? There is one book in particular, The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, that I only encountered about 15 years ago. And he helped me to clarify what my own life purpose is. He writes that it is man's humanity that makes him so inhuman. What he is getting at is that it is our unique quality of human beings to create ideas about the world that determine what we can see and what we cannot see, who we are, and therefore what's possible. So I realize that that's all fine if the dominant ideas through which we see are fundamentally life-enhancing, life-affirming, but I realize that here I am alive at a time when the dominant mental map, I call it, he calls it the frame of orientation, but the dominant way of perceiving is fundamentally life-destroying. And that, I know, is a very big claim, but let me just say that I believe that you and I are alive at this moment of possible transition where we can let go of, we can shed a deeply dysfunctional set of assumptions about life itself. And this is very connected to an entrepreneur's work, because the fundamental core of what is taking us down, down, down is a premise, a perception of lack, that the world doesn't have enough in it. There's not enough of anything. There's not enough food. There's not enough energy. There's not enough parking places, we learned, in your neighborhood. And there's not enough goodness inside of human beings, that we are basically just selfish little shoppers. So, the most important contribution that I believe entrepreneurship, to me, the entrepreneurship is another word for creator, bringing forth the new, that we must, in our work as entrepreneurs, shatter these notions of lack, of scarcity, that set us in a trap of fear and keep us believing that all we can do is produce more, 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 and not look at the underlying causes that are creating conditions in which that production is actually destroying the very basis of life. So I'm asking us, and I hope that it's okay if I consider myself an entrepreneur with you, that our mission must be to let go of the mechanical worldview that we inherit, that is based in lack and based in separation, based in parts, and take on what I think of as learning to think like an ecosystem. Think like an ecosystem. And see social analog that we can create, the social analog to ecology. How do we apply the reality of ecology to society? And here I think first of the words of your fellow German Hans-Peter Durer. Do you know his work? Hans-Peter Durer, who writes, there are no parts, there are only participants. This is thinking like an ecosystem. Once we begin to think like an ecosystem, we realize that as long as we are aligning with nature's laws, there is no scarcity, there is no lack. There is enough, more than enough, including enough in human beings to make enough pro-social qualities in us to make this planetary turn toward life. And so for me, the key piece of lack that entrepreneurship, to be effective in our work as entrepreneurs, is to drop the false view that we absorb as sort of an invisible ether in this dominant worldview, that fundamentally most people, this is the false view, that fundamentally most people simply are passive, want to be passive spectators of life, and only a few of us want to be doers. As Erich Fromm said, we should drop the Descartes idea of I think, therefore I am. Actually, what describes life, most people, is rather I am because I affect. That if we start from the premise that it's not just a few of us who want to be creators, but most of us want to feel that we are co-creating something positive, then as entrepreneurs we see the challenge of our work to create not products that we give to others, we the providers of some new product, but rather how do we create new processes that empower all those who participate in it and help to generate ongoing new ideas in others as well as ourselves. And so in this social analog to ecology, I see economic life, or I see all dimensions of public life in a new light. In other words, we grow up thinking that the best we can do is a democratic society in which all the parts sort of work independently in a sense. But the political system is the primary piece of democracy, it is a set of institutions that are finished and done. But in this emergent idea of an ecology of democracy, if you will, economic life is just as much part of democracy. And your work in the economic sphere is just as much part of democracy as any political party or political institution. Because as we shift to an ecological worldview, to think like an ecosystem, to see that there are no parts, only participants, we realize that the reason that democracies are failing now to solve our worst social and environmental problems is that we think of them as separate institutions, as something done to us or for us by others. And I'm suggesting that we must let go of the notion of democracy as a set system that we inherit and see it as a set of system values that permeate economic life just as much as political life. And I'm talking about the values of inclusion, of mutual accountability, that we are not simply, accountability doesn't go just one way. It is always goes in multiple directions. And we are accountable to one another and all who we work with. So I think this moves away from thinking of a sort of one-to-many product that I bring to the world, to think of many to many connections that my work can help facilitate as an entrepreneur, helping to empower rather than simply to supply, the shift from supplying others to empowering others. And this then, we begin to see that the term network is not just a catchphrase, but it is the reality of human and existence and all of nature. And I shall wrap up.
Maybe let us understand it more deeply. I understand that you say entrepreneurship is not about scarcity, what the economists say, and about producing products and sell it, but it's about empowerment, and it's about participation.
Yes.
A culture of entrepreneurship, a broad culture of entrepreneurship with a lot of participation. How can we put that in a more practical view? Of course, we want to participate, but people believe, particularly in Germany, we need capital. There's a lack of capital. Mm-hmm. There's a lack of understanding of business administration. I need to understand about bookkeeping, accounting, tax problems before I can start as an entrepreneur. What is your opinion on that?
Well, all those are tools, and I believe they are all necessary tools. But when you say we have to have all that in place, this goes to another piece of my message, and that has to do with fear. That I would suggest that, particularly in the United States, but it's probably true here, that we live in cultures of fear and belief that we inherited the idea that as we step out and try the new, that we've learned through eons of evolution that is pretty dangerous if we step away from where the dominant tribe is going. And so I suggest that another feature of entrepreneurship, and maybe this is still not practical enough, but it's very real to me, and that is that we also have to realize that fear, too, is in part an idea. And one of the features of the dominant fear message is that we have to have a map. As entrepreneurs, we have to have a map of each step that we are going and all of our tools in our toolkit before we can begin the journey. And what I'm coming to see is that at this moment in human history that we have to rethink fear as not, when you, I'm sure, experience as you are taking risks, that you feel these body sensations, at least if you're like I am, you feel these body sensations of discomfort, of fear. And we have to reinterpret those now to say to us, oh, I'm just feeling the additional energy. It's not a verdict. I'm in the wrong place. these sensations may be telling me I'm exactly in the right place. And that then fear becomes a signal not of failure, but maybe something that you can say, oh, I'm really doing it now. I am really, really moving into new territory. And rethinking then, realizing that the core then is the realization that I don't have to have that roadmap all the way out. That yes, I can start with the basic motivation, the basic inspiration, and then trust that if I keep moving, and this is the ecological worldview, the thinking like an ecosystem, recognizing, as now the scientists tell us, that the neuroscientists tell us that we live in a field of mirror neurons, so that when you see me going like this, actually there are neurons in your brain going like this with your hands. So that means that as you step out with your brilliant ideas, that other people will be experiencing those and come forward, and that with additional tools and offerings. So I don't have a formula, but I am convinced as I look around, and I believe that you mentioned the name of Muhammad Yunus, and I mentioned him, and I traveled to his country with my daughter several years ago, and he is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, because when he founded this now global microcredit movement, he did exactly what I'm talking about, where he did not know. He started by listening to others in this networking understanding. And he started by listening and then creating one small step, which led to the next and the next and the next. I'm talking about Dr. Muhammad Yunus, the founder of Grameen Bank. And he experienced this same moment of dissidence where that launched him on his pathway. But it wasn't that he followed a map to get to his destination.
Mm-hmm. That's the title of your book. Packen wir es an, something, get a handle on the situation, get a grip, let's go for it.
Yes.
It's interesting because there's a famous advisor, Guy Kawasaki, for entrepreneurship, and his main theme is, let's go for it, go for a cause. Not think in products and capital and scarcity, but go for a cause. Mm-hmm. Would you say that's the go for a cause and start it, and don't wait for the last final answers to something, but could we say get a handle on the situation and start and use the handle? Or
absolutely, and by handle I'm asking us, I'm asking us to look beneath the symptoms, to ask really what are the root causes of our global problems. And I think that at least some of you may come to see, as I see, that at the very root is people feeling themselves disempowered and discounted. And the more that your work can allow people to see their piece of the solution, the more that we can turn our entire planet toward life.
Go for a cause, start going. What is your own experience? When you started, I presume nobody took it really seriously. She's talking about some idealistic ideas, and in the beginning it's tough. Nobody knew you, nobody was waiting for you. It's the situation of an entrepreneur. You start by zero. Yes. How did you manage to get some attention, to get some reward, to get some kind of financing of your books? How was it when you yourself went on the path of an entrepreneur?
Well, the single most important word, and I wish I had included it in the subtitle of my book, the single most important word, concept, is curiosity. The historian Theodore Zeldin writes that curiosity is the greatest antidote to fear.
Neugier.
And so I started with great curiosity. about why is there hunger in the world. And I only had a question. I didn't have an answer. I only had a question. And then that question became, why is there hunger in a world where there's plenty of food? Because in fact, there's more food in the world. There's enough to make us all quite chubby, in fact. So then the question kept growing, and so the question grew to, why are we creating a world as societies that none of us would choose as individuals? And that question, so it is that curiosity. I would never have thought of writing a book. Actually, I made a very bad mark on my first paper that I wrote at the university. So I would never have imagined myself as a writer. And I was horrified at the thought of sending my my writing to New York, to the largest paperback publishing house at that time, which is now part of Random House, and I would never have imagined. But it was the curiosity, and I think if we are really, really focused on what we have to know and share, then we let go of all those negative messages telling us that we are the wrong person, we don't have the right skills. And so that was the beginning. And what changed my life was when my first book was published in 1971, almost 40 years ago. What changed my life was the realization that there were millions of other people asking the same question and wanting to feel that connection between their own life purpose and the solutions to the global problems. And that's why my writing, I think, sold books. And so I think that the more that we each can help others see how their action creates something positive in the world, that our own work can flourish. We start with the assumption that most people want to feel part of the solution. I think it is why you in Germany here have been entrepreneurs in the public arena by creating the feed-in tariff, the EEG legislation that is now going around the world. The state of Hawaii in the U.S. just has adopted something based on your model, because this public entrepreneurship, by showing a way to create a law that allows the alignment of the family, of the household, putting on your solar panels or creating your windmills, of which I've seen a lot already in Germany, that you are aligning your individual initiative with what the globe, what the planet needs. And so I think that is exactly an example of the kind of thinking. How do we enable people through such setting the boundaries, using legislation, using just new norms and examples and new services to allow people to be part of the solution?
You say don't listen to the answers so much, but put curious questions.
And the questions.
Yeah.
Asking the right questions, yes. Yeah.
But our educational systems wants us to repeat the answers that others have given, the solutions that others have given. And you, as I understand you, you say, don't believe so much in the solutions and the answers of others. Put your own question. Pursue your own way of questions. Could it be put like that?
Yes, very much. Very, very perfect, yes.
And you say we don't need to wait for the educational system to change, which all gives away our curiosity, or even takes away our curiosity, and teaches us to listen to the answers that the teachers give or others have given. You would say, finally, we need not wait for the educational system to change. We just go ahead with.
Absolutely. We can't wait for anything else to change to take this approach, I believe. But anyone listening who is a student, what I say in university audiences is, don't waste any opportunity to ask a question that matters to you. Because I had to leave university before I learned I had questions that were my questions. Now I'm telling every young person, every paper that you have to write, make sure it is attempt to answer a question that you care about. And I think in virtually any course that you are taking, you can find a question that will help you move forward about something you have to know. in order to go on living? What do you have to know? And that then, so we can, by our very questions, change the educational system. Just as in our very purchases, we change the economic system. By our very behavior in our workplaces, we are changing economic life. We don't have to wait for the whole society to change. Thinking like an ecosystem, we know that we are radiating out through multiplicities of networks every time we do something differently.
Entrepreneurship usually is something on, you start a company, you have an idea, you have a business idea, you have a business model, and then you sell something. Could you give us an idea the way you encompass entrepreneurship, the way you would go ahead, not by producing a product, but by curious questions, or how would you put it in practice?
Well, I think about the kinds of things that I have done. For example, I'll just give you one example.
Yes.
I believe very much, now, that we are social animals, that we are constantly modeling ourselves on one another. And so I said, since I believe that then, and the major press, the major media is only giving us images of so many negative images, that what if I started a news service that wasn't about just sort of corny feel-good stories, but was about real people. In my case, it was real U.S. citizens who are coming up with solutions in education, in business, in farming, etc. And so I said, why not? I can start a national news service. Why not? And so over a 5-year period, I created with others a national news service. We were very sneaky, though. We wanted to sneak in as very mainstream. And so we called it the American News Service. Red, white, and blue. Who could be against that? And so, but all we did was we had journalists across the country. We ended up, by the end of our run, it's not going on now, but through this process, we generated 1,600 original stories written by professional journalists. And so what we discovered is that the news media really was interested in offering, because people wanted it, more news of problem solving. But it took greater resources than just covering the bad news. And they didn't have access necessarily to these. And so by providing these stories, we actually got published in half the largest papers in the United States, about 300 papers in the. But it started with this one thought, and that was people learn from one another, and if all they're seeing are negative images, then they'll think, oh, well, yes, human beings really are selfish and just, competitive and just interested in themselves. If they see people like themselves actually coming up with solutions, they'll say, oh, I think I could do that. And we saw those ripples going out community by community. So that was an example of starting with a core observation question and thinking, why not?
That's a good example, because usually people would say there is CNN, there's ABC, and now comes somebody completely unknown and with no big capital background, and who could you compete with these giants? And you said, not interesting to me. I don't follow the conventions of these big guys. We just put new questions. We have our own way, and it succeeded. Did it succeed from the beginning? How was the feeling when you started?
Well, in the beginning, it was very interesting. Our first break, again, you have to trust there are other people on the inside who share your values, that they may be looking for an opportunity to actually express their values that are aligned with your values, but they're inside they look like they're just trapped in the dominant corporate paradigm. In our case, there was a large news service, the Night Ritter Tribune news service that is now part of a larger one. But at that time, they said, we love these stories and we will carry them on our wire. So it had the imprint of this larger established organization because of one person who said, oh, this is wonderful, this is really interesting material that we couldn't have otherwise. So that was the beginning for us. All it took was one person in a position able to put our stories on this national newswire that then went to hundreds of newspapers around the country.
Your business model, to say so, was put positive news, not just the negative incidents on the
but
street. Not positive news written as
isn't that sweet. It was actually it was about the struggle, the difficulty, the edgy pieces of it. But it was what was significant and what was unique is that every story dealt with an attempt to solve a problem. Some were, for example, one just pops into my head is about companies that succeed by making their financial system completely transparent to their employees, so that everyone feels more and more of a stake and more of a participant in the company. About farmers in the U.S., the problem is we're losing our family farmers because the farmers on average, are so old. I think that's probably true in much of Europe. So we wrote a story about a sort of like a matchmaker to a group that was finding elder farmers who could mentor and teach the younger farmers and help them find the land and create a life in farming. Very practical solutions like that. A story I'll never forget from a very simple idea from Chicago where children would often come home, very poor children, come home with no one in the house. And so they set up a hotline called Grandma Please. And you could call after you got up from school, you could ask for Grandma Please, and they would connect you to an elder to just chat with about your school day. Very simple ideas that would never have left Chicago, probably. I would never have heard about them in the East without a news organization that could create just a little story that could trigger this idea.
That's a perfect example for social entrepreneurship. You need not have much capital, but that idea and a few people to participate. Probably they were not paid or not very well paid in the beginning.
Not very well paid, but and this, of course, was before the internet really took off. This was in the 1990s, and so now it would be a very different model, but then we had targeted the print media at that time.
Maybe as a final question for our audience, there's a lot of people in solar energy, there's a lot of people in ecology, ideas, how to change products, how to change cosmetics, things like that. Is there something, an idea that you would like to join with us that one or another of our participants would pick up and maybe turn into a business? You have so many ideas in your book. Is there one that you love, a particular way that you put it into practice in Germany?
Nothing quite like that, but I think nothing particularly comes to mind, but what does come to mind is that at least in the United States, that's what I can speak from, very much the idea is that as fossil fuels become more expensive and we have what we call peak oil and global heating of the planet means we have to give up fossil fuel, that this means dark, dreary times. And I sense in this room are many of you who share my belief that actually this transition will not be a diminution of human capacity as we transit out of fossil fuels, but a liberation of human capacity. So I think what my emphasis is what are the images and metaphors we use to encourage people to become excited about the possibilities of this new era, because we've been trapped in an era of highly concentrated social power, in part because our energy sources have been so highly concentrated. And we have become so dependent on the decision-making of a few corporate giants in the world. And so as you then now, what a time to be an entrepreneur when we can invent things, invent processes and connections that keep power dispersed and allow more and more people to feel the resilience and take a deep breath that we're not just dependent on a few and especially imported and insecure sources of energy, but we can be liberated to be more self-reliant and resilient in our community. So as you create new processes and work with this model of not just one to many, but many to many, then you will help people become more creative because you're easing their fear of loss and you're showing a pathway of participatory economic life that I think we're all developing a taste for at this point.
I think that's a wonderful summary for us to say there's economic power in the field of energy, but also in most other fields. There's a concentration of economic power, and the only way to do it is by participating in that power, by competing in a sensitive way and say, we can do it, we can participate, we can play in the field.
And by that very fact, then you are part of the dispersion of power, which we now know, if we look at the history of our species, we know that the dispersion of power is what brings out our pro-social, the better parts of our complex human nature. And we can leave behind this highly concentrated power, which we know from history and from lab experiments on us, brings out the worst in us. So I think on the deepest level, that the extent that you are willing to step into the new and to let go of the idea that we can ever get over fear and realize that we've just got to move along with it and use its energy, that you, by your very lives, you are participating in addressing the very roots of the global crisis. And I honor you for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This